We are at the point in this class that I have been waiting for, and I'm sure you have been too. We are going to plant some seeds. I'm going to show you how easy it is to start seeds at home. I use a few different containers. There's going to be a few different techniques that I'm going to show you. Let's get to it. Do you remember back when we were talking about our supplies? Do you remember the few basic things that you need to start seeds or that seeds need to do well? It's really not that much. You need 6 things essentially. You need some sort of container or vessel. You need a good quality seed starting mix. That could be soilless or one with soil. You need good quality seed, of course. You need water, you need light, and the correct environment. Let me remind you that the ideal germination environment for seeds is 80% humidity and around 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And most seeds do not need light to germinate. Now there's a few outliers. Lettuces and dill sometimes like to have a little bit of filtered light to germinate. Seedlings themselves need around 60% relative humidity, but there's a lot of flexibility there. If you're too dry, you can give them a little misting. If you happen to be too humid, you could add a little more ventilation or a dehumidifier to your room. Temperatures actually can get down to 50 and they do quite well. You just don't want your seedlings to freeze, but they do not need to be as warm as they were during germination. They do need lots of light. I have heard of people being able to grow seedlings in sunny windowsills and southern facing windowsills, but that's pretty rare, especially here in the northern zone. 16 hours of light for these plants to be really happy and healthy, and that just is pretty much unheard of. So I do use artificial lighting. You can go back to the lighting section and learn a little bit about that, but a good bright white daylight LED bulb that is around 5,000 K plus will get you in the ballpark. Add a timer to make it simple. There are 4 categories of containers that you may decide to use or come across. DIY, I don't love this method, but I'm just demonstrating it so that you know that it's an option. So I have toilet paper tubes, and then I've also seen people make little pots out of newspaper. They use solo cups, they use yogurt containers. Those are great. They don't cost you a lot of money, but they can take up a lot of space and might not be the best size for your emerging seedling. These, for example, are pretty small. Depending on what I plant in here, it's going to run out of room pretty quickly. Another example are these strawberries or grape clamshells. These are great because you could almost create a little greenhouse effect with them. So I always save these and wash them up and reuse them. And I'll show you how we do that when we talk about broadcast seeding and soil block. Disposable or single-use containers, these type of pots that are very familiar to you from home stores or you'll find at nurseries. I actually saved from last year's plants. Any kind of reusable container or repurposed container you want to clean really well before you use it. And the way I do that is to wash with hot soapy water and dip them in either a diluted bleach mixture, like a couple gallons of hot water with a cap full of bleach. Let them sit for 5 minutes, rinse them off, let them dry. You could also spray them down with a 3% food grade hydrogen peroxide and let that sit for 5 to 10 minutes and wipe them clean. I've also heard of people using a white vinegar solution to clean their pots, but really you're trying to get all the dirt off, any mold spores, so that you don't introduce any kind of disease to your newly started seedlings. Also in the category of disposable or single use are a 6-pack like this. These are very flimsy, not very sturdy type plastics. They're not meant to be reused year after year. They just break down and fall apart. Other pots like we'd mentioned that are in this category of single use would be more natural and compostable options like cow pots, peat pots, designed just to take your seedling and plant it right into the ground. On to the third category of pot is reusable. Now these are technically from a nursery. I bought plants in a few years ago, but they're a really sturdy, more high quality plastic. This is a 4-inch square. And so I hang on to these and I wash them and they've held up really good. So many of the really sturdy plastics work great. My favorite type of container are these bootstrap farmer containers. I use the large 10 by 10-20 trays for microgreens, and also these 5x5 trays for individual orders of microgreens are also seed starting. Works quite well. You can see I have some tomatoes broadcast seeded here in a 5x5 and also some basil. You'll notice that these are seeded very thickly, but we'll talk about why that is and how you can work with that. These trays to add to the container. The last category or option for your container or vessel is soil blocking. Now, I mentioned that soil blocking is fairly new to me, but I'm really excited to do it more and more. Personally use the 2-inch soil blocker. It's a 2-inch 4 blocker. You can see it has the little dibble on the inside for planting your seed, and I'll demonstrate how to start seeds in soil blocks. I feel that the 2-inch size is a great universal size, especially for the home grower, but there's also 3/4 inch blocks that you plant seed in. You can germinate a whole bunch in one single 10-20 tray, but you'd have to pot them up into something bigger like a 4-inch soil blocker and even a 6-inch soil blocker. The cool thing is they make blockers that have, instead of the dibble, they have a square, so you can just take that 3/4 inch soil block, plop it right into the square of the bigger block, and you're good to go for potting up. That is really cool. Let's plant some seeds and use some of these different styles of containers. All right. There are 4 different planting methods or options that I have found to work out for pretty much any type of seed that I need to plant. Pre-sprouting, broadcast seeding, container planting, and soil blocking. Let's talk about each one of those individually. Pre-sprouting is a method where you take a seed, you provide the correct environment, which is moisture, dark, and warmth, and you allow that seed to sprout before you actually even place it into any kind of soil mix. And I'll give you some examples. So with microgreens, pea is a very common crop with microgreens, and I always pre-soak my pea until we get the little root tail. This is important for large seeds like pea and sunflower because they really need to be essentially woke up from dormancy, right? And the soaking overnight, at least 6 hours, but overnight, in just cool, clean water, rinsing them a couple times a day for 2 to 3 days, putting them in some sort of strainer basket until they sprout is a wonderful way to know that your seed is viable. You're going to have good results planting. Now, I just take the seed and go ahead and plant it. I could either plant it out into the garden or you could plant ahead of time. Now, pea is not one that I recommend starting indoors, but this is just an example because I grow microgreens every week with sprouted pea seed. So another example that you can do with your smaller seeds and seeds that you aren't going to start indoors is to pre-sprout them in plastic Ziploc bags. I love this method for seeds that are known to be very difficult germinators, like a lot of flowers and herbs. And also, if you have seed that's a little bit old or seeds that you have collected yourself and you're just not sure about how well they're going to germinate, this is a great method because you're not going to spend a lot of time and resources, soil, and all that kind of thing actually planting it, giving it space and light, only to find out that it's not even a viable seed. This method is really easy. I've pre-sprouted jalapeno. I've pre-sprouted a tomato that I collected from some seeds at our local school garden. So I'm really not even sure the variety of that tomato, but they were big, beautiful tomatoes, and they were probably hybrids, but I'm gonna go ahead and give it a try and see what I get and maybe make my own variety, who knows. I also have sweet pepper seed that was pretty old and I wasn't quite sure how it was gonna do. The way that you do this is quite simple. You just take a regular old paper towel, a clean paper towel, and you mist it with clean filtered water, and you sprinkle your seeds on the middle of the paper towel, you fold it up, you place it in a Ziploc bag, and then cover it. I usually use like a tea towel or a washcloth and put it in a warm location. I like to put it on the top of my refrigerator. Leave them for the appropriate germination time on the back of your seeds, and you'll check them around day 2 to 3, but if they're a long germinator, you could check them a little bit later. You don't want to leave them too long. The root may grow into the paper towel and you'll damage it, removing them from the paper towel and then proceeding to plant. So we're going to open these up together and see what we've got. Go ahead and demonstrate planting these pre-sprouted seeds. No matter what container you're using, you're always going to start with a good quality seed starting mix, and I always recommend pre-moistening your soil. The soil I'm using today is actually Lucky Dog Canine Growers Blend by Fox Farms. This is new this year for me, but the reason I purchased it is it's a good all-purpose seed starting mix, and it's also supposed to be quite good for soil blocking. Soil blocking requires a mix that really holds together well and is not crumbly. Otherwise, your soil blocks will just fall apart. Now, I've mixed enough water in here for this to be moist, like a wrung out sponge, but not overly damp. I don't want to be able to squeeze a lot of water out of this soil. My moist soil mixture is going to go right into my containers. Let's go ahead and do this. I'm notoriously messy on pretty much everything that I do. All right, now with these paper tubes, I just put them into the container and pack them 2/3 of the way full with soil, and it just sticks right into the tube. And then I have this little container just to kind of keep them organized there. Now, you'll notice that I filled most every container at least 1.5 to 2 inches. Not super firmly, but firmly level out. You can even use another container. If it's too loose, the root will grow down in just fine, but it's not going to be able to hold that emerging seedling up very well once it gets to a certain point, right? It's just going to most likely topple over. Now this is a nice, soft, fluffy mix, so I'm not worried about it becoming too dense and compact. If you were using something like a garden mix or something else, which you shouldn't for seed starting anyway, you would have to worry about getting this too compact. Now I like to use another container to just level off when I can, when it fits. All right, that didn't take it too long to have some nicely prepared containers, all different sorts, so that's kind of fun. Let's go ahead and plant these and we'll move on and I'll show you soil blocking last. First, our reusable Bootstrap Farmer 5x5. I have a tag here indicating that this will be cauliflower. Make sure that you write the name on your tag. You may think you'll remember, but I promise you, you will not. Ask me how I know. Now, this first method that I'm going to show you is going to be broadcast seeding. You can broadcast sow pretty much, anything. I do it all the time with microgreens, but I broadcast thickly. And essentially what this means is you're going to use one larger container and you're going to take your seed. Now, I say in your book you're going to use about 1 seed per square inch. It does kind of depend on the size of your seed. This is a 5x5 container, so we want at least 25 seeds in here. And I'm just going to ballpark that. You know, that's probably closer to 30. But I'm just going to sprinkle this across the surface of the container, just like so. Not only is this a broadcast sowing method, this is also going to be a stacked blackout method. Our starter mix is moist, but the seed is dry. We're going to give it a little misting. We want the top 1/3 of the soil at this point to be quite moist. I'm going to go ahead and put another container, the same size, right on top. And I'm also going to add a little bit of a weight. With a container this size, I may use a 1 pound to a 3 pound weight, and I could stack up multiple containers. This is the same method I use with microgreens, and it works great. So what you're going to do is you can stack them up. It takes up very little room wherever you're going to germinate. In about 2 to 3 days, I will lift this off, and I will have little teeny tiny cauliflower plants. and I'll put it right under my lights at 2 to 4 inches and let them grow. Yes, they're going to be pretty thick in this container, but honestly, they're going to be quite happy in here. I'll bottom water them, and they will not need to be potted up until they've reached about twice the size of the container, or they look like they're competing for light and nutrients. And I can go ahead and gently pot them up. But man, we put 30 seeds in 25 square inches. And with a stacked blackout method, you could do up to 4 or 5 stacked trays just like this and germinate your whole garden in a very tiny little spot. Then you can spread them out under your lights in an area that isn't quite as prime real estate as a warm germination area. So this is the stacked blackout method. This will go in a warm, dark location, which is usually next to my fridge, covered by a tea towel until they germinate. You will not need to water these until they come out of germination. You can check them and give them a little spritz if they look like they're drying out, but because you have another container on top, it holds in moisture. Broadcast sowing in a disposable container. Let's go ahead and do that. I have my label on there. This is a disposable strawberry container that I'm using. In this, we're going to go ahead and plant some herbs. I would like to plant some cilantro. Now, I often plant cilantro as a microgreen, and so I plant it very thickly in a 10-20 tray, and I do the broadcast method, I do the weighted blackout, I just surface sow it. Now, cilantro is notoriously difficult to germinate, and go ahead and look at that. Yay! We have some happy little sprouts. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to gently remove some sprouted cilantro. And I left this a little long and it's starting to grow into the paper towel. We're just going to be gentle removing that. And I have plenty of seed here. You can use a tweezer if you like. I'm just using my fingertips and trying to be careful. Okay, so there's some cilantro. You can see on this paper towel that there were some cilantro seeds that did not germinate. Those would be planted in our pot, taking up valuable real estate and would never sprout. Now I have some sweet pepper and pepper here. They do take a bit longer to germinate, and they haven't germinated yet. So I'm gonna leave them in the bag, keep them moist, put them back in a warm, dark location, and hopefully I can plant them a little later. I surface sowed the seeds here in this weighted blackout tray. In this method, I'm going to go ahead and cover these with just a very light layer of seed starting mix. Technically, these have germinated, but they're not big enough. They're not quite sprouted enough to go under lights. So I'm going to go ahead and do this and just keep it dark and warm until that cilantro pokes out through the surface and is asking for the light. In the 6-pack, I had saved seeds on some flowers last year, some stock, which if you don't know what stock is, it's a really beautiful flower for flower arrangement. It also smells really good. Now, I'm not sure how these are going to do. This would be a great one to pre-sprout just to see how the seeds do. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and plant, collected and dried the seed. And these are teeny, tiny, tiny, tiny little seeds. So I'm going to make a little finger divot in the top of each cell. Now remember our little rule of thumb from Laura Ingalls, we want to plant 4, 1 for the rook, 1 for the crow. That will leave just 2 to grow. On these tiny little seeds, I'm actually planting probably like 6. But I had them, I didn't have to pay for them, and I just don't know how they're going to do. All right. Quite a bit of seed in here. I would normally be more careful about that, but I don't know how well these are going to do. I mean, this is just an experiment. Now I'm going to lightly cover these with just, maybe an 1/8 inch of soil. A rule of thumb for depth of seed is about 2 times deep as the seed is wide. 2 to 3 to even 4 seeds per container. Doesn't matter the size, although it's best to start with a smaller container. I think a 2-inch is great for starting, because we are going to plant in these 4-inch containers, but that's a lot more space to find for a germinating plant, and you also have to keep that a lot more soil moist to make sure that your seeds get enough moisture. Now we're going to go ahead and moisten this really well. It's done. In these 2 containers, I'm going to plant a cabbage. Make a little divot with my finger. Put 4 seeds in each little divot. Cabbage. Light layer of soil. Pat it down just a little bit. Mist the top third. Now these are ready for warm, dark germination. Lastly is sweet pepper. Now I showed you my sweet pepper, pre-germinated sweet pepper. They don't look like much. They don't look like they're going to germinate, and that was an old seed. I have a new packet of seed. California Wonder Green Bell, 65 days to maturity, 7 to 10 days to germinate. I'm putting 4 seeds in the pot, but I'm actually spreading them out just a little bit. I want them to overlap or touch. All the seeds do germinate. I'm not going to be able to leave all of them in the container. What I'll most likely do is keep the healthiest looking 1 or 2 and clip the weak ones off at the soil surface. A 4-inch pot has plenty of room for pepper plants, but I don't want them to get too crowded. So if that becomes an issue and you seeded heavily, you can go ahead and just snip them back. These little DIY toilet paper tube planters, we're going to go ahead and plant Italian parsley. Parsley is an herb also that's often difficult to sprout, but I do have teeny tiny little germinated seeds happening. This is actually the perfect time to do this because the sprouts are not too big that they're growing into the paper towel. Try to remove the ones that look viable. A tweezer is a great tool because they can be quite sticky, but we're getting it. Most of the time I like to germinate my herbs by the broadcast stacked blackout method. I just feel like every herb does such a great job. Beautiful basil. And what I'll do with this is harvest some of it and eat it early as a microgreen. But I can also take out a little chunk of soil, try not to disturb the roots, and pot that up into a larger container. Oh, it smells so good. On top of our pre-sprouted parsley, add a little bit of soil. Water all of these when they come out of germination, bottom water only. During planting is the only time we're going to top water our seeds. I want to put these in a little container just to keep them under control and organized. What's cool about these clamshells is you can just close them up. They act like their own little greenhouse or their own little humidity dome. Okay, the last seeding method that we are going to cover with each other is soil blocking. Now, I know I've told you this may be my new favorite method. We'll see. This is only my second year doing it, but I know it's extremely popular. There's lots of people doing it, and so there's also lots of questions. Now, like I said, I have the 2-inch soil blocker. You can soil block and fill a whole tray, a whole 10-20 tray. So a 10-20 tray being 10 inches by 20 inches, you could technically fit 5 blocks by 10 blocks, 50 little 2-inch soil blocks in a 10-20 tray. You could almost start your whole garden that way. But if you were to plant a full 10-20 tray with a different vegetable in each spot, they all have different germination times and growth rates. So that is sometimes kind of challenging unless you have a huge garden. It might seem like you could germinate everything you needed in just one 10-20 tray, but you might have tomatoes that are tall, and you might have cabbage and broccoli that are pretty small, and they just have different light requirements as far as how close the light is to them. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Today, I'm going to go ahead and start some broccoli. I'm going to put my soil blocks into a large strawberry container. It does have holes in the bottom, and remember, we always want to bottom water seedlings after germination until we plant them outside. We never want to get the top of the soil, the leaves, or the stem wet again, because that can introduce mold and disease. Let's get into the soil blocking using my Lucky Dog Canine seed starting mix. But with soil blocking, you want to make sure that the mix is pretty fine and doesn't have great big clumps in it. So I'm going to go ahead and just sift this. A garden sifter works great. I didn't have one on hand, so I'm just going to use this plastic colander. But you can see that even though this mix looks pretty fine, sometimes pieces of wood or larger pieces of perlite or vermiculite, and those can just keep your soil block from holding shape. So we want to go ahead and sift that. Okay, I'm going to take my sifted seed starting mix and I'm going to moisten it. Like a really thick brownie batter or a wrung out sponge. I don't want it to be super saturated. See, that's holding together quite well. I think that'll work good. Now, to actually form the soil block, I'm going to press this cookie cutter essentially into the container until the soil is nice and compacted into this form. And take my container or whatever you're going to use for the vessel to hold your soil block. You could just use straight up your bottom watering tray. And I'm going to go ahead and press these out. In fact, I think I'll just press them onto the table. Go right into your container. They can be touching, they can be a little bit apart. I'm going to make 2 more. Yeah, one of the benefits of soil blocking is that when the roots hit the perimeter of the soil block, something called air pruning happens, where the root just naturally stops growing. It doesn't circle around and become bound up and tangled like it would in a container, and that is root bind. What the soil block does is air prune the plant root, but it'll just naturally take right off when it's transplanted. That's so much fun. I like that a lot. I always like making soil blocks. Some people find it tedious and also difficult, like to squeeze the device. They do make handheld stand-up ones. Now we're going to plant. Very similar method to planting in a container. I have my early broccoli seed. 3, 4-ish seeds in each little spot. Cover lightly with fine vermiculite or just a little bit more seed starting soil. The mist, just like if we're container planting, give it a good watering. Now once these sprout, we're going to switch to bottom watering, and you just water around the soil block or in the bottom watering container. I'm going to go ahead and get these planted veggies in a warm, dark area to germinate. I actually have a little makeshift germination station, so they'll likely go in there. And because I have lights in there to keep it warm, I will cover them with a towel. Now, humidity is the other thing that is important with seedlings. Remember, they don't need light, they need warmth and moisture. In Montana, we're really dry. And most of the time, you're going to want something to hold in the humidity for your seeds. Now these trays, this is a 10-20 tray that I use for a bottom watering tray. So once my seeds germinate, I'm gonna go ahead and water in this tray, and they'll soak up the water. For germination, we wanna keep the bottom 2/3 of the container moist instead of the top 1/3, because remember, the roots grow down in, the roots aren't at the surface at that point. On a humidity dome, or if you don't have that, you can use some saran wrap or press and seal. They're in germination, we really shouldn't have to do anything with them other than check them at 2, 3, even 5 days whenever the variety is supposed to have germinated by. And as that little sprout pops through the surface, I'm going to get it under light as soon as possible to prevent them from stretching and becoming too tall and leggy. Thank you so much for joining me in planting our seeds. Next up is all about seedling care. Do we pot up? Do we pot on? And when to transplant out?